Hi, everyone. Welcome. I'm so excited today because we have Amy with us. I've known Amy for a few years now, and we connected because we share love for yoga. She's a published author, but I'll let Amy introduce herself and then we can go from there for this conversation. Lots of nuggets of wisdom from Amy. We are going to get as much as we can from her. So, yeah, I'm excited for our conversation this afternoon.
Oh, I'm
Maybe.
so excited too. Hi, Aditi. It's so nice to be here. I am an international yoga teacher, an intuitive healer, and a postpartum prenatal birth doula. So, yeah, I'm so excited to be connecting with you. It's been such a delight to see the ways that our paths have intercrossed and how our work is so complementary.
Absolutely. So, do you want to share a little bit about your personal journey, how you discovered this path, like what led you? Because I think when we are healers and helpers, it's a calling almost.
Yes, exactly. It's a calling for sure. My grandmother was a healer. So I was raised, with her teaching me about reflexology, aromatherapy, holistic massage, energy healing, but most of all, I think her connection to God and source energy. So she was a very devoted woman and very steeped in our traditional medicine of Ayurveda. So I grew up with her wisdom and, her care for 25 years. She was the biggest source of unconditional love in my life. She was also the first person to introduce me and my brother to yoga. When we were 7 or 8, she showed us these books in her home and we'd like laugh and like do the poses in her living room. From the age of 11, my grandmother and my mother started taking me to a temple space to study yoga. So I grew up studying yoga from then on for 3 times a week, twice a week in the temple and once a week at a community center. And it was my place to land. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't, a fancy studio. It cost a $10 optional donation a month. So it was a very, very sacred space for me. And I grew up in that temple. I really found myself and my path.
No, this is beautiful. So, tell us about your gifts, like intuitive healer. What does that mean? And tell us about like how does healing happen when we tap into our intuition and movement with yoga? Like, how does healing happen?
That's such a beautiful question. How does healing happen? Well, first of all, I always say that we're all healers. Every single person is a healer. If you get a cut, your body will naturally close that cut, right? And it will smooth over that new skin, new cells will regenerate. We all have our natural healing capacity. And sometimes we just need to be in a space where that natural capacity can effortlessly bloom and blossom. And my job and my role as a healer is to hold a loving, compassionate space to allow for the healing energy to transmute. So for me, my energy runs through my hands. That's how my grandmother worked, and that's how her lineage worked. And you know, um, my initiation as a healer happened when I was 20. I experienced a massive Kundalini awakening that was quite traumatic and took me several years to recover from. And in the course of those years, I discovered frameworks of healing that served me and provided stability and a way to channel the energy that was moving through my hands. So, yoga, as you know, runs on a lot of energetic principles, the way that the energy moves in the body, the way the muscles, the bones, um, the meridian lines in, for example, traditional Chinese medicine, it's all very, very linked in Eastern medicine. So as I practiced yoga and grew up really activating those channels, it was quite a natural progression for many people that do yoga to become more sensitive to the way that energy moves. So after my grandmother died, in 2017, I was traveling and working abroad and teaching yoga and etc. And I had this very bizarre experience of, 3 different people ask me for a healing. And in that moment, I knew that it was my grandmother, like coming through my hands, because I had never really trained in anything. I had done Thai massage, I'd done therapeutic touch, but never really trained in a healing modality, So I was kind of surprised myself. I was like, well, I can do what my grandma did, but like that's just, touch and massage and maybe you'll feel better. And so I did, and I listened to that. And the three people that I helped, they all felt better afterwards. And they all paid me differently. It's funny. The first person paid me in biodegradable glitter. The
Wow.
second person paid me with a full meal that they paid for, and the third person offered to pay me in money. So for her whole life, my grandmother never was paid money for her healing gifts. She was always just doing it out of the goodness of her heart. She would spend hours massaging people. She was really, really a giver, right? And so she taught me to like never drain my own resources. She was very careful. She was like, don't do healing until you have a training. Until you have a training, Emmy, don't do it. People will take advantage of your energy. And sure enough, that can happen. So I decided to embark on a training called Intuitive Energy Massage, which is a blend of holistic massage, energy healing, and intuitive coaching. So those three elements are present in every session that I do. I trained on Vancouver Island here, where I live now. I did advanced training in that modality, which then led me to several other modalities, including, dabbling in the Rosen method, dabbling in resonant. Well, I did a training in resonant attention with Stella Ozarojos. I started learning about, pranic healing, just various modalities that are all listed on my website, but they all bring something new. And I would say that healing in my sessions is about releasing a lot of emotional trauma. I tend to work on the emotional body quite a bit. Because I'm a trauma informed yoga teacher, I take a trauma sensitive lens, and embodied pedagogy was what I studied at university. So I always am coming back to that sense of the nervous system and grounding into the body, the breath, these ancestral traditions, how they weave and flow. So, it's hard to describe what happens in a session besides that. I bring in those different techniques. I share what I know, what my frameworks are. I've also studied with a shamanic teacher for the past, I guess it would be 6 years now. So I've been studying with her and learning so much with her about journeying into the other realms. So many influences, but ultimately, my grandmother is my biggest inspiration, and I see myself in service to the body, the mind, the heart.
Yeah, no, that's beautiful. Like the wisdom. And it's like once we are on this path of healing and helping, the plethora of wisdom out there is, there's so much out there. And it looks like you're continuously upgrading your information and knowledge and growing. And that's what you bring into your sessions.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's integral for any kind of healer, coach, mentor, teacher, that we're always receiving our own support, that we have healers that we're training with, or sessions that we're receiving, that we're never done training. It's, for me recently, the biggest learning has been birth, and the experience of supporting women through birth, and doing, doula training and prenatal and postpartum and mom and baby, and all of these learnings. They make sure that we're growing and expanding in our offering, because it's like the moment that someone thinks that they have it all figured out is the moment that I run away from them, because there's too many people out there, I think, who are doing a short training and think that they know everything. And I'm like, nobody knows everything, nobody. And the wisest man admits he knows nothing. That's a quote that my grandparents would often share. So, when we're rooted in our ancestors, when we know where we come from, when we're grounded in our gifts, but we know that they're not the end all be all, that it's not my job to fix anybody, it's my job to hold the space for them to reconnect to their own inner knowing.
Right. No, that you put it beautifully, that as helpers and healers, we hold space for them to experience whatever is going on for them. What do you find, Amy, are some of the misconceptions folks might have about these ancestral healing practices, about yoga and movement and breath work? Like, what do you encounter in your work, or as you have conversations with others, what do you notice?
Well, I think that we're moving out of this paradigm, but there used to be this idea that all this stuff was like woo woo and not real, right? Like that science didn't support it, that it was too out there, that it's like, it's just like an imaginary thing. Like, but the reality is that we are all energy on a quantum level. Every cell in our body is frequency. and sound is frequency, light is frequency, everything is vibrating energy. So you can't deny that fact that, energy can't be created or destroyed. It can only be transformed. These are laws of physics, right? So science is starting to support this work. It's still slow. I will say that I do feel like I'm on the forefront of like this newness that this kind of work, because it's kind of beyond words sometimes. Sometimes it's something you just have to feel and experience to notice that you feel better or come back to a sense of grounding. So, I think misconceptions are that it's not real. The misconceptions are that it's imaginary, that it somehow doesn't work, that it's, I could safely say that every person I have seen has generally felt better after a treatment. So the power of touch is probably some of our oldest medicine on the planet. Even when I think about healers of the past, they often, through palpation, through caring touch, they were transmitting energy. And whether or not you believe that's true, that they're channeling universal life force energy or Reiki or whatever you want to believe, it doesn't really matter. What matters is the person, does the person feel better? Is there a tangible shift in their life? Do they start to relax more? Are they able to move through a blockage? For example, one of my clients had a devastating accident. She was in her late 60s. A fence fell on her while she was walking. So she had fractured her leg and couldn't walk, and for over the span of maybe 6 to 8 months, I would say I worked with her almost weekly. We would do a blend of body work and yoga. Sometimes she couldn't stand, she couldn't sit. By the end of that time, she was walking unassisted. So for me, that's like proof enough that this modality that's thousands of years old, yoga, it goes back to the Indus Valley 5,000 years ago. It is really effective. Of course, there's all this research coming out with yoga therapy, with trauma-informed therapy. I love learning again, but I don't base my work on purely scientific evidence simply because I think that the science isn't there yet and that scientists themselves are affected by culture. So they're not unbiased. There may be attempts to try to make them unbiased, but they're not because their funding is coming from particular bodies. They're part of institutions that have particular focuses. They are ultimately coming in with a lens, right? We all have a lens that we view things with. And I love science, but there's even scientific evidence out there around the perception of the scientist affects the result of the thing. So there's this famous wave and particle study I think it's in physics, where, they proved that when the wave was being observed by someone, it changed. So the observation of the scientist has an impact on the results, if that makes sense. Like we're all coming with our particular culture, with our particular lens. We're seeing the world through our eyes. Therefore, no scientist is ever unbiased. So I think that science is always evolving, it's always growing, but we cannot rely on it entirely because we need to go through our lived experience too and decide what form of healing or help works for me individually, right? Like what works for my mom is not going to work for me necessarily, or what works for the guy down the street is not necessarily what's going to work for me, simply because we're unique. We're ancestrally unique. We're unique in our psychology, and I love that about what you bring, Aditi, is that psychological element, because we all need at times someone to hold space. I really do believe that counseling is so helpful.
Yeah, I was gonna ask, like, when you encountered like this woman, the beautiful story you shared, thank you so much. She seemed like receptive to the idea, but what do you do when there is resistance, like energetic resistance or some defenses, or like physically they are not able to move? What do you do then, like when you encountered those barriers or resistance or defenses?
Well, thankfully, all the people that come to me are generally open. So they're generally open to alternative complementary medicine. They've generally tried things. They usually really love delving into the other world. So for me, I don't have that problem. Actually, everyone who comes to see me is very open and receptive
Right.
to what I have to offer. So I'm very lucky in that way. I don't I work independently, I have my own business. I don't have to yeah, I don't have to encounter that resistance simply because those people are not attracted to me and what I do. So yeah, I feel pretty lucky that I don't encounter that resistance.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
that's beautiful. So when you're working with someone, say with intuitive, touch, or whether you are leading a yoga class, like, do you notice some energy that's not aligned, or noticing some kind of, that, okay, this posture doesn't look right, or something's happening here that maybe needs either correction or more investigation?
Yeah, I think that's a really great question. As facilitators, when we notice that there's a release happening or there's pain or suffering that's arising, that's really when our role is very important, when energy isn't flowing or energy is stuck. So, for example, very early on in my career, I started teaching professionally in 2012. I had a client, a student in a yoga class who was in a deep level of exhaustion. And this was when I was teaching at UBC. So I was teaching to a lot of students, and in the class, the student, um, in Shavasana, they fell asleep, but they fell asleep to the level of we couldn't wake them up. So they were unconscious, very much not able to be woken up. So what me and their friend did was we waited for everyone to leave, everyone else was gone. We just sat with them. We reassured them they were safe. We held space. Eventually they woke up and were very disoriented and didn't know where they were. And in those moments, I think that's when the presence is really important, to know that just to be present with another human being when they're going through something, to be their witness,
Yeah.
that's sometimes all they need.
Mhm.
Um, and that was a very sensitive, impactful moment in my career because it sort of just gave me a lot of compassion to, again, be humbled that I don't know what's going on for this person. Like, I don't, it's out of my scope to, I'm not a first aid attendant. I'm not a doctor. I'm not any of these people that are here to diagnose. I'm just another human being that is here when they are having an emotional release or they need to rest. Often sometimes students would just come to my classes to be in a restorative pose and rest for a while. So I can provide that rest, and it is important to know the scope of practice, I think, to know that, um, again, we can't make claims that are not real. So sometimes I see intuitive healers out there that are like, I can fix this and I can do this for you. And that's a sham. Like, I don't believe in that, you know, nobody can fix
Yeah.
everything. Like,
Yeah, what you mentioned in the beginning, when someone says, I know everything, it's like, okay, we need to move away from that claim.
danger. Yeah.
Absolutely. So what does emotional release look like? Like, what do you notice that that, okay, emotional release is happening? Are people generally aware, or like, do you bring them to that realization?
Emotional release can happen in many ways. In my trauma sensitive approach, I've seen it happen through shaking, through, physical sensation. I've seen it happen through tears, through sobbing, through sometimes, in some workshops I've been to, I myself have had emotional release that's anger related. So I might need to like physically move it out, just really like get it, just express the anger in a safe way. Because I think as people conditioned to be women, we're not taught how to safely express our anger. So one of the goals I have for the future is, like having sacred rage workshops where people can come to an anger room and really just be witnessed in their safe release of anger. Because as a child, I was not taught how to safely feel my emotions. So what happened was I pushed them down, pushed them down, pushed them down, right? And just like you're pushing a beach ball underwater, one day they're going to explode, right? And that explosion happened to me during my Kundalini awakening when I was 20. So I know that our school system, I'm in my early 30s, did not teach us how to safely feel, move through, express our emotions. And my family didn't, unfortunately, wasn't able to offer that emotional safety either. So, when we feel safe and when we feel held and when we know that we're okay, that our surroundings, we have access to, our basic needs getting met, then finally emotional release can happen. And energetically, emotions can sort of, to me, like appear like a ball of energy. Like, when I first started practicing IEM, intuitive energy massage, I would put my hand over someone's body and I would sense the knot, right? Like the place where the energy was constricted or balled together, right? And I would just hold that part of the body and information would come through, right? So I would say, to the client later, like, hey, I've got this, my hand over this part of your body. I'm getting an image of a man with a cowboy hat. Does that mean anything to you? Right. And just from a spirit of curiosity, I'm never claiming to know what their experience is. I'm just saying, this is my experience. When my hand is over your body, I'm seeing clairvoyantly a man with a cowboy hat. And, that particular client burst into tears and said, I'd been sexually assaulted by a man in a cowboy hat and I'm going back to the same place. And so that information that is there in our body doesn't lie and our body holds memory. So the answers are in our body. And so what I tell my clients is my job is to have a conversation with you and your body. I'm talking to your body when I'm touching you, I'm inquiring, and it's never done without consent. I always ask for energetic consent. I always ask for physical consent. I'm always making sure that if they need a break, if they need a moment to just step back and let something process through, that's my role, is to create a container for them to really feel safe enough to ask for what they need. And body workers of all types work in that sense. They are attuned to the human. They're their nervous system, the co-regulation that happens in those moments when we're touching, that's where energy is exchanged. That's where information can happen. That's where healing can happen. One of my mentors says that anytime that two people come together, there's this mystical third. There's this possibility between this connection of two people for healing, for compassion, for understanding, for wisdom to fall through. So anytime you're connected to another being, there is the potential for the mystical third. And for me, that sacred container, that space where someone feels safe and heard and witnessed and met, and not like they need to be any different. And I think that is the key part, is that attitude of non-judgment, of I'm meeting you on this equal level of I see you, I hear you, I get it. I'm here to hold space. I'm not here to fix.
Yeah, and you brought in so many important parts. Like when we do our work, there has to be non-judgment, there has to be compassion, empathy, um, and in many ways, like, seems in your work like you're giving. So what do you do? What fills you up? Like, how do you do self-care, like after a
Yeah.
challenging session or a challenging group that you have led? Like, how do you take care of you?
That's such a great question. I think all healers, helpers, counselors, mentors, whatever you are, they all need to have their own ways of discharging, right? So for me, water is one of my greatest tools and allies. I have some Pisces in my chart. So water has always been a place of floating, of flowing, of relaxing, of resting. So I try to immerse myself in water in many, many different ways. So I always wash my hands. I'm always using water in every session, but um, I try to, immerse myself in natural bodies of water. I do floating. I love flotation tanks. I love the sensory deprivation of not having to answer to anybody. Sometimes I feel like I just need a break from the world. I go in a flotation room and, there's a great place in Vancouver called Pure Float, and they do like a neuro spa first. So you can be in this kind of like a chair that's all dark, and then it vibrates and makes sounds to help your neurophysiology. And then after you're relaxed, you get in the float tank. and you can just fully sink into that experience of floating in 2,000 pounds of Epsom salts. So I find a lot of healing in floating. I find a lot of healing in seeing others for body work. I love getting massages. I love going to experience different art forms, healing art forms around the world, whether it's, Lomi Lomi from Hawaii or many other beautiful healing modalities from different cultures. I think that the work that we do needs to be culturally sensitive. And I'm always wanting to learn from those people that are hopefully either directly ancestrally connected to that modality, or they have deep, personal, meaningful relationships that are reciprocal with that culture. So I really, appreciate healers that are reverent toward the type of healing they do, whether it's Thai massage or many different kinds. So I love receiving body work of all kinds. I spend a lot of time in nature. I live in nature. I walk in nature every day. I communicate to nature. I ask, for plant allies in my shamanic journeys. So often I'll get like, an herb come through, like comfrey or, lavender, or a plant ally that will connect with me personally. And, I'll drink their tea, or I'll drink a tincture, or, work with herbal medicine as a like, yeah, as a relationship. Again, it's a relationship. It's not me going to the plant saying, fix me. It's me going to the plant saying, hey, what can I offer you? What can you offer me? What feels good for both of us, and the plants and I are very happy together. So yeah, I spend a lot of time with flowers too. I volunteer on flower farms. I do a lot. I definitely have to prioritize my self-care in this work because it is so emotionally demanding of me. Um, some of the work I do these days too is mental health advocacy work. So that's incredibly draining emotionally. So I always have to refill my cup. And sometimes, after leading a retreat, I'll go on my own personal retreat, right? So I think if we're helping, we have to find those ways to make sure that our cup is full. And those times when it's not, to just be honest and say, I'm not at 100% right now. What do I need to give myself to refill so that I can show up as the best I can? And we're not perfect. We don't have it figured out either. Like, we're all just doing the best we can. But I do think we have a responsibility as people holding space that we don't project or bring our own stuff into sessions. That's something that unfortunately I've experienced from others as a projection of trauma from the healer, which was really harmful. For example, when I was a teenager, my mother, wanted to help, and she got me to see a craniosacral therapist. And we obviously did not do enough research into this particular therapist, but that therapist really took advantage of my vulnerability as a teenager and disclosed information that was really inappropriate and did not respect my confidentiality, and projected their own ideas of who they were onto me. They would even say things like, I was just like you when I was a kid. And that's really inappropriate. And that can be deeply scarring. So it took me a long time to return to craniosacral and have a different therapist that was very clear about, these are my boundaries. And I have clear boundaries as a practitioner, so boundaries, safety, ethics, these things are integral in our professions.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing, that vulnerability, sharing your own journey, and, giving us some wisdom. So if someone wants to get in touch with you, how do they do that?
Yeah, I'd love to get in touch with anybody that's interested in yoga, intuitive healing, or doula work. I work on the south coast of British Columbia for my doula work. It's all available on my website. So it's Emmy, Emmy Chahal, CHAHAL.com. So you can see everything that I offer on my website. You can also connect with me on Instagram. It's just my name, Emmy Chahal. And yeah, I have a book of poetry. I have some recorded content for yoga teachers out there who want to be culturally sensitive. And I teach workshops for different, yoga schools around the world about how to be in right relationship to India and to Indian women. I know that's something that you and I really feel, excited about is centering South Asian voices in the yoga industry, and yeah, promoting cultural ancestral healing. So yeah, my website, Instagram, would love to hear from you. You can always message me through my website.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Amy, for taking time to connect with me. Everyone, I'll be leaving information in the description below so you can reach Amy. If you have more questions, you can reach out to her and connect with her. But so appreciative of you taking time on beautiful Tuesday afternoon to connect. And thank you. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you, Aditi, for holding space for these conversations.